Have you ever secretly smiled when a boastful celebrity got exposed? When a rival team lost the championship game? Or when someone who constantly bragged about their success suddenly stumbled? If so, you've experienced something psychologists call Schadenfreude, the pleasure we feel when someone else experiences misfortune. While many people are uncomfortable admitting it, Schadenfreude is one of the most common and universal human emotions. It crosses cultures, ages, and social backgrounds. Even the kindest people occasionally experience it. But why does this happen? Why would the suffering of another person make us feel good? In this presentation, we'll explore the psychology, neuroscience, evolutionary origins, and cultural impact of Schadenfreude, and discover what it reveals about human nature. The word Schadenfreude comes from German. Schaden means harm or damage, and Freude means joy or delight. Combined, the term literally means joy derived from another person's misfortune. Importantly, Schadenfreude is different from sadism. A sadist enjoys causing pain directly. Someone experiencing Schadenfreude doesn't create the suffering. They simply witness it and derive satisfaction from the outcome. It's also different from gloating. Gloating occurs when you defeat someone and take pride in your victory. Schadenfreude, on the other hand, can occur even when you had nothing to do with the person's downfall. In short, Schadenfreude is a reactive emotion. You observe someone's setback and experience a sense of pleasure, relief, or satisfaction. The question is, where does that satisfaction come from? One of the strongest triggers of Schadenfreude is the belief that someone deserved what happened to them. Imagine a dishonest executive being caught committing fraud, or a bully who finally faces consequences for years of mistreating others. When people perceive wrongdoing, a later setback can feel like justice being served. Psychologists call this the deservingness pathway. The emotional reward doesn't come from the suffering itself. Instead, it comes from the feeling that balance has been restored. Humans have a deep desire for fairness. We want good actions rewarded and bad actions punished. When reality appears to deliver that outcome, many people experience satisfaction. That's why the downfall of arrogant, dishonest, or cruel individuals often attracts public celebration. To the observer, it doesn't feel like cruelty. It feels like justice. Another major source of Schadenfreude comes from comparison. Human beings constantly evaluate themselves relative to others. We compare our appearance, wealth, success, popularity, intelligence, and achievements. When someone we view as a rival experiences failure, it can temporarily improve our own sense of standing. Psychologists call this downward social comparison. If someone ahead of us falls, we feel relatively higher, even if our own circumstances haven't changed. This effect becomes especially powerful when envy is involved. Envy creates emotional tension because another person's success highlights what we lack. When that successful person encounters a setback, some of that tension is released. For individuals with fragile self-esteem, these comparisons can become particularly important. A rival's loss can feel like a personal gain, even though nothing tangible has changed. The comparison itself creates the reward. Schadenfreude isn't limited to individuals. It also operates at the group level. Humans naturally organize themselves into teams, tribes, communities, and identities. These groups can be sports teams, political parties, workplaces, fan communities, or even social circles. When a rival group fails, members of the opposing group often experience pleasure, even if they have no personal connection to the people involved. Why? Because group identity becomes part of our self-concept. A competitor's loss can feel like a symbolic victory for our own side. This strengthens loyalty and reinforces group bonds. The phenomenon is easy to observe in sports rivalries. Fans often celebrate a rival team's defeat almost as enthusiastically as their own team's victory. The same pattern appears in politics, business, and online communities. In many cases, simply belonging to the other side is enough to trigger. Schadenfreude isn't just a psychological experience. It can actually be observed in the brain. Research has shown that when people witness a rival's failure, activity increases in the ventral striatum, one of the brain's primary reward centers. This is the same region associated with pleasurable experiences such as winning money, achieving goals, or receiving positive rewards. In other words, the brain can literally treat another person's failure as a rewarding event. Scientists have also discovered a fascinating connection between envy and Schadenfreude. When we envy someone, a region called the anterocingulate cortex, or ACC, becomes active. This area is associated with emotional pain and conflict. However, when that envied person later experiences failure, the reward system activates. The emotional discomfort of envy can transform into pleasure. At the same time, areas involved in empathy often show reduced activity. The suffering of the other person becomes less emotionally significant, allowing the reward response to dominate. From a neurological perspective, a rival's setback can feel remarkably similar to a personal victory. If Schadenfreude feels so natural, there may be an evolutionary reason. For most of human history, survival depended on status, resources, and social alliances. When a rival lost influence or suffered a setback, opportunities often open up for others. A competitor's failure could mean greater access to food, territory, mates, or leadership positions. In this environment, paying attention to rivals and benefiting from their decline may have provided a survival advantage. Schadenfreude may also have helped reduce perceived threats. A weakened rival represented less danger to individuals and groups. At the tribal level, shared reactions to outsiders' failures reinforce group cohesion and strengthen social norms. Researchers suggest that Schadenfreude may function as a social mechanism that regulates dominance and status within groups. In essence, our brains may have evolved to view a rival's misfortune as information that improves our own position. Although our environment has changed dramatically, Schadenfreude remains deeply embedded in modern culture. Today, media industries often package and amplify this emotion. Sports rivalries are perhaps the most socially accepted example. Fans celebrate not only their own team's success, but also the failures of their rivals. Social media has expanded this phenomenon even further. Viral fail videos, public mistakes, and online humiliation can spread to millions of viewers within hours. The digital environment often reduces empathy while increasing comparison and judgment. Celebrity culture also thrives on Schadenfreude. Public scandals, embarrassing moments, and dramatic downfalls attract enormous attention because people are fascinated by watching the powerful fall. Reality television frequently builds entire programs around elimination, conflict, and humiliation. These formats are successful because they tap directly into emotional mechanisms that humans have carried for thousands of years. Not everyone experiences Schadenfreude to the same degree. Research suggests that certain personality traits make it more likely. People with fragile self-esteem often use other people's failures to reassure themselves. Individuals who constantly compare themselves to others may be especially vulnerable. Those who experience strong feelings of envy can also be more prone to, and people with powerful group identities may derive greater satisfaction from the failures of rival groups. But there are costs. At the societal level, Schadenfreude can contribute to online toxicity, public shaming, and social division. Political polarization often becomes more intense when groups celebrate each other's failures rather than seeking solutions. On a personal level, excessive Schadenfreude has been linked to lower well-being and reduced life satisfaction. While occasional feelings of justice or relief may be harmless, habitual enjoyment of others' suffering can weaken empathy and damage relationships. Like many human emotions, Schadenfreude exists on a spectrum. If Schadenfreude is the pleasure we feel from another person's failure, its opposite is called Freudenfreude. Freudenfreude means finding genuine joy in another person's success. Unlike Schadenfreude, this response doesn't happen automatically. It requires conscious effort. Practicing Freudenfreude strengthens empathy and encourages healthier relationships. Studies suggest that people who celebrate the successes of others often report greater happiness, stronger social connections, and higher overall life satisfaction. The most difficult test comes when a rival succeeds. Can we genuinely appreciate another person's achievement, even when it doesn't benefit us? That ability reflects emotional maturity and psychological resilience. Schadenfreude may be part of our evolutionary wiring, but Freudenfreude is a choice. And perhaps one of the most powerful choices we can make is to celebrate the victories of others rather than waiting for their downfall. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this exploration of human psychology, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more fascinating insights into the hidden forces that shape human behavior.